Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. The Podstash is available on YouTube, SoundCloud, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Let us know where you want to listen, and we'll release there as well.
If you want to help us improve the podcast, check out our shops at blackmarketmemes.threadless.com and dankpodstash.threadless.com. Links will be provided. Anything you buy helps us make the Podstash better. Business owners and creators, advertise on the Dank Podstash. Reach a larger audience, make more sales. Email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com for details.
Washington State listeners, please check out Washington State Anarchists and Libertarians Facebook group. Help us expand the Agora face to face. All right, welcome to episode 22 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Have an interesting one today, something that I didn't think we'd be jumping into, but we're going to be talking with one of the Libertarian Party presidential candidates. How you doing, David? I know you're here with us today, right?
I'm always here, maybe not all here, but at least present in some sense.
Yes.
But we're speaking with Daniel Taxationist Theft Behrman, and, well, I'll just let him introduce himself.
Hey, here I am. I'm right here. Nice to meet you.
You too.
So before we get into letting you speak on whatever you'd like to speak on, I have a very pressing question, the most important question that you're ever going to be asked throughout this whole campaign, I'm sure. And this is it.
Good morning. Why are you gay?
Why not?
That's a good answer. Why not?
Right. Probably the most impressive question in investigative journalism that I've heard thus far. So,
is this going public? I can neither confirm nor deny the allegations.
Excellent.
It's asking the hard-hitting questions.
So what we usually do, Dan, is we just have some time for you to talk about whatever you want. We're all about getting voices out everywhere in the community, making strong voices so that other people can hear and take what they want from it. So what do you have for us today?
Awesome. Well, my whole campaign message is pretty much we are not government property and taxation is theft. So, we're in a really shitty political climate right now. Everybody's just like, they want to hate somebody else. And, really we got to pull ourselves out of that, and we got to stop asking government to solve all our problems. We got to start trying to come up with solutions that don't involve sticking a gun in someone's face. And, once we do that, I think we can actually move on from what we're stuck in now to an actual peaceful society.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely get on board with that. So what
Awesome.
brought you to where you're at now?
Man, it's interesting. I think, I don't know about you guys, but for me and most of the people that I've met that are kind of in this rut of government sucks, it's government has, we've just been sitting there minding our own business, and government comes along and slaps us in the face with fines and taxes, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And I just got sick of it, man. So, over enough time of fighting the system and then finding out that, they're trying to act all high and mighty and say, oh, we have this really ethical system where, it's the law of the land, and we have all these moral these moral levels that we expect everybody to behave according to. And then it comes to find out that the entire government is just this completely immoral, racketeering, mafia type organization that's lying to everybody in order to convince them to give up all their hard-earned money and act like slaves. And I just had enough of it.
Do as we say, not as we do, right?
Yeah, it's insane. And so like I got into this, like I used to fight traffic tickets the sheep way, right? Like, you go to court and you try to get scheduled for a time when the cop's not going to show up, and you try to get in there and you try to argue the points about how, oh well, he can't prove I was going over this speed limit. And I used to get, for a while I got pretty good at that. And then I figured out, like, hey, these courts aren't even real. These, like, this whole system is a farce. These judges aren't real. They're not elected. They're not sworn in. They're not under oath. All this other stuff. And like when I saw that, when I first heard about that, like I refused to believe it. I was like, no, that's crazy. That's like, if that were true, it would be on the news. Someone would tell us about this. And then I started, like, examining the system for myself and actually putting it to the test. And man, at every corner, like I started fighting traffic tickets as if that system were fake. And at every corner, the system just came out and kind of admitted that, yeah, this whole thing is an illusion. Everyone's paying their tickets because they're afraid of what we'll do to them. And it's mind blowing. And everyone's just I feel like, I'm running around trying to, like, I'm the nutty conspiracy theorist, because I'm trying to like show people some of this stuff, and everybody's like, what? That's crazy. That's not true. And I'm like, yeah, I used to say the same thing, but just take a look behind the curtain for once. And it's really amazing what's going on. It's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone
So
finds
did that-
himself in that
Did that?
position. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was going to ask him, is that something that kind of inspired you to run for president? Like, what inspired you to run?
So I mean, that's kind of that kind of got me into this whole liberty freedom movement. I was kind of always like that since I was born, but I just kind of accepted, like, okay, government's always going to be there. But the more I realized government has robbed me more than any criminals I've come across in my entire life, the more I realize, like, something really has to change. And every time I go and I see politicians talking about what they're going to do to fix the system, even like I've been following the Libertarian Party for a while, and even their candidates are, the stuff that they say, like I hear what they're saying, and they're trying to, like, help people out, or they say they're trying to help people out, but it's like I'm like visualizing, how is that actually going to work? What are you actually going to do? And the stuff they're talking about doing is making government bigger, even the libertarians. And I'm just like, enough is enough. I can't sit here and listen to this shit anymore. I've got to say something, and I've got to do it. I've got to have my philosophy represented in this entire discussion. Because right now, even the libertarians, the ones that, there are a couple of them who, even some of the fringe candidates in the Libertarian Party come close to what I represent, but they don't really nail it, and I don't think they express it very well, and I don't think they make it, in a way, they enjoy just pissing off the left and the right. And it's like, those guys make up 60 to 80% of the country. We can't just sit around pissing them off, as much fun as that might be. Like, we have to get them to understand that they're participating in a giant racketeering scam, and they're trying to, they're electing politicians who are basically forcing that system on everybody else who wants no part of it. And if we don't wake them up to that, and if they don't see that, then, we're outnumbered. And we can talk about how democracy is gang rape all we want, but as long as those people are there and we're outnumbered and outgunned, like, there's not a whole lot we can do. If we really want to get out of this, we've got to wake everybody up, and we have to show them that a life of freedom and liberty is actually beneficial to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're not endorsed by the Libertarian Party, but are you running as a libertarian?
So I'm running as an independent, but I'm asking the Libertarian Party for their nomination and their ballot access. The reason for that is, I could easily sit here and say I'm a libertarian, because we do really have a lot of fundamental overlap in our positions on things. But the reality is, you look at the libertarianism itself is about individuality and individual freedom, and, everyone doing what they want without being harassed, as long as they're not hurting people or taking their stuff. But you look at their platform, and their platform has, all these different things in them. Most of them are pretty good positions. But there's not, I go to these conventions, and there's not a single person in that room who's a delegate to any of these conventions who can sit there and say, I wholeheartedly agree and defend every single point on this platform, and I refuse to accept any changes to it. There's not a single person like that. And I can't say I'm like that either. So, that's kind of like, libertarianism, if it's about individuals and individual expression and individual freedom, why would you just turn around and stick a big label on yourself saying, I fit in a box? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So, most libertarians have a lot in common with me, but I'm not going to go around saying I'm one of them, because that kind of violates that principle.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So something, kind of a general statement that I've kind of come up with about the Libertarian Party's stance, or whatever their slogan is. What is it? I can't even remember what the damn slogan is right now. But all your freedoms all the time. That's what it is. All your freedoms all the time, as long as you follow the rules. Would you think that's accurate?
I mean, it's like, here's the thing. If you look at like murder as, we don't want people going around murdering. Is that a rule? Did we just create that? Is that something that, man decided should be a rule, or is it something that God decided? I mean, it's in the 10 Commandments, right? Is it something that is a scientific fact, like you can prove it mathematically that we should not murder? If and actually you kind of can, if you start with the assumption that we're all equal. You can kind of get to that. But the reality is, what about the assumption that we're all equal? Is that a fact of nature? And so you look at this, and like, you have to understand, like, as much as we want these rules to be inherent in the system of life, they're really not. But most people will sit and agree, hey, murder is bad, theft is bad, rape is bad, damaging property, all these different things are bad. But then once we start saying, okay, we're going to allow men to write rules because we came up with 5 or 6 really good rules, we're going to allow them to go write these massive tomes of like hundreds of thousands of pages of these rules about how we should govern our lives, how we should, oh, you want to borrow money, you want to start a business, you want to where does it end? So the fact that we have rules is already a slippery slope, and we need to always be vigilant in keeping that as minimal as possible. And I think, so going back to your point about all your rights all the time, what are our rights? And, we sit here fighting over that like all the time. Like, and when I say we, I mean all of humanity. Some people will say freedom of speech is a right. Others will say you don't have the right to say what you're saying because that's hate speech. We've got some people now saying healthcare is a human right, which, if you look at it from the perspective of, I have money, here's a doctor, he's willing to take my money and examine me and give me medication, then yes, that's absolutely a right. Do you have a right to steal from somebody else in order to get that health care? No, that's theft. And we look at government, and government's making all these rules that says, it's funny. I was listening to Bernie Sanders today. He's like, yeah, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make healthcare more affordable by taking everybody off of the health insurance that they like and putting them all on Medicare. And that's going to lower the cost of healthcare. And I'm like, how the fuck is that going to work? Right. So I let him talk a little bit more, and he's being interviewed by Wolf Blitzer, and Wolf is like, so nobody can keep the plans that they have if they want them. And Bernie basically says no. And, he doesn't address the fact that, hey, we actually have a competition problem in this country where the government is coming in and saying, you can't manufacture these drugs because you haven't paid us enough money. So you can sell them outside the U.S., but you can't sell them in the U.S. All these doctors coming in from overseas, they want to practice medicine here, but they can't. When you go to the doctor, you have to pay all these administrative employees that basically push paperwork around all day, and 10 different nurses to come and check up on you before the doctor can see you for 10 seconds. All this stuff makes it really expensive. And all Bernie Sanders is focused on is sharing that expense, which basically means all these corporations are still going to make their massive profits. And it's like, okay, wait, hold on. If we get government out of this equation, what's going to happen is the cost is going to come down. More medicine is going to be available, more doctors, more care, more options. The cost goes down, and we don't even need insurance because we can actually afford it. So, back to, I know I'm going like way off on a tangent. Back to all your freedoms all the time. What are your freedoms? Like, if we can't even agree on what the fundamental is of what freedoms are and where they come from, then what does that even really mean? I think that's a really important underlying issue that we have to address.
Absolutely. It gets people really riled up when you're talking about everyone is an individual and has a right to individual freedom, and then say, well, what can we agree on? People get really triggered by the word "we" in those situations, and
Right.
I would imagine it in a stateless society, it would break down to the community that you voluntarily associate with, which a lot of people don't think about. And then as far as Bernie and his plan there, it's a totally understandable what he's saying from his perspective, because he's looking at it from, we're going to keep everything the same as far as government, and this is how we're going to solve the problem, which obviously is not going to solve any problems. It's only going to make it worse.
Right. Yeah, he's, his thing is he's always picking on the rich, right? They've got so much money. It's hilarious. I'm watching this, and, some kid asks him, well, how are you going to pay for these programs? And he's like, we have so much wealth inequality. And he starts going off on that. And, the top 3 people in this country own more billions than the rest of the bottom, 20%. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, so you're just going to go rob them? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
And, he comes short of saying that, but that's basically what we're going to make them pay their fair share. That's a euphemism for we're going to rob them.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah. And how did these people get so rich in the first place? People gave them money. Like, one of those guys is Jeff Bezos, the guy that he's CEO of Amazon. I guess, I don't know how big of an owner he is, like how much stock he holds, but yeah, he didn't steal that money from us. We went on Amazon.com, we put in our credit card number, and we sent him money. That's how he got rich. It wasn't like, he's not this big evil guy running around with a gun like the IRS is, putting a gun in people's face saying, hey, give us your money. That's what the IRS does, which is, if Bernie Sanders gets his way, Bernie Sanders will be commanding the IRS to run around with guns and take money from people, versus these wealthy people who just like, we're sending them money because we like what they're giving. We love what we get in return.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting thing I've seen come up lately, is when, I don't know if it was announced on the news or where it came out, but I've been seeing it float around on social media that people are outraged that Amazon's not paying however much taxes that they think they should be paying. And this is coming from people who also believe that taxation is theft, and they're angry when somebody doesn't have to pay it.
Right. Yeah, I say it's a good start. Now we just have to work on the rest of the country.
Absolutely.
Getting them to pay 0%.
And you have a whole taxation is theft, I don't know exactly what to call it, but a project, websites and whatnot that you work on?
Yeah, so I do a podcast. I've got a store, taxationistheft.cards, where it's just a bunch of T-shirts and stickers and all kinds of cool stuff. I actually use that store to help a lot of libertarian candidates set up their websites and sell some merch at no cost, just to kind of help the cause. Some of the guys that I really agree with, and that's the other thing. Like, there's they talk about, are you going to support down ballot candidates? And I look at the candidates and I'm like, yeah, some of them, but I'm not just going to blanket support all of them, because some of them are kind of nuts. Some of them belong in the Democrat or the Republican Party. Not that they're bad people. I just don't agree with their platform. So I can't blanket support that like the other guys do. But yeah, so Taxation is Theft. I do the podcast. It's a live stream. I have some really interesting guests on. Here's a really cool fact. I created a video. Are you guys familiar with the tax freedom? The tax honesty movement?
I am
where
not.
they say there's no law that says you have to pay income tax. So
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, so basically, like, this has been going on since the 70s, and this guy Irwin Schiff wrote a whole book on it, and he went through like all the tax code and everything, and he started helping people filing their taxes in a way that they didn't have to pay income tax. And of course, the government didn't like that, so they came up with they tried to ban his book, which they couldn't. And so they made a bunch of fake charges on his IRS filings and put him in prison, and he died in prison before because of that. That's actually Peter Schiff's dad.
Right.
Yeah. So kind of in part of this movement, people have continued to figure out, how does the IRS work? How do the laws work and all this other stuff? And there's, it's an ongoing movement. It's been going since the 70s. And somewhere along the lines, this guy came up with a bounty. It started at $10,000. He said, I'll give you $10,000 if you can find the law that says I have to pay income tax. And it went up to $50,000. Now it's at $300,000. If you can find that law, they'll give you $300,000. Of course, nobody's claimed it because it doesn't exist. And this includes IRS agents who have investigated this as well. And so what I did is I created a video about this, and it's got all the information in there. And I put this on Facebook, and this video has been seen over 6 million times so far.
Awesome.
So and it's got like the comments and the conversations that are going on there is really awesome. And it's like, it really gets people thinking, like, wait a minute, is this true? Especially when Bernie Sanders running around talking about Amazon not paying any taxes. What if all these other people who are working for factories, who worked at restaurants, anyone earning minimum wage who, it's not a livable wage because the government's taking such a big cut out of it. All these people realize, hey, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be paying tax. My paycheck's supposed to be twice as big because they're not supposed to be stealing out of it. Man, can you imagine?
Yeah, for real. That's the best way to cut them
a
off.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Cut them off at the knees. Hit them in the wallet. You'll have to send me that link for your video so I can add it to the show notes here. I definitely want to check that out. I wasn't familiar with the name of the movement. I had heard of what you were talking about before. I love Irwin Schiff. Rest in peace. That wasn't too long ago that he died in prison, either, was it?
Yeah, it was just a couple of years. I've actually got a handwritten letter from him because when I first started learning about this, I sent him a letter. I was kind of doing a documentary on, and this kind of started back with the traffic ticket thing and the taxes and everything. And I wrote him a letter, and I was like, hey, if I can convince the prison, and this is me being young and naive, if I can convince the prison to let me go in and interview you, would you be up for it? And he wrote me this letter back saying, like, they will never allow it. They're reading all my letters that are coming in and going out. And he was just like really in a state of paranoia, understandably. And this was all before, all the NSA stuff came out. Yeah, it was, I don't know. It was just really awesome for me to connect with him, even just in that short bit. And, that documentary that I was working on, incidentally, as I said, when I started first learning about the stuff with the traffic tickets and how government is fake, and now I'm learning that the income tax is fake also, I really just kind of went into a depression, and I was like, man, I can't even look at this stuff anymore, because I was just like, what can I felt like a slave. Like, everything I'm doing is to serve this government, and the more I learn about it, the more I just hate my own existence. This can't be, this can't be right. And every time I tried to prove it wrong, it proved itself right. And I was like, man. So, that's kind of why I never finished that documentary, but I continued to just go on and, learn as much as I could and connect with some good people like yourselves and some other people that are really fighting for real freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine being in Irwin Schiff's position there. That's going to be a hard way to live out the rest of your days.
Oh, yeah.
That's too bad nobody could get in
It's
for an interview like that. It'd be really cool if someone could get through to Ross Ulbricht as well. There's a lot of good people in prison, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's insane. They keep that. You know what? This always blew my mind. We have a constitutional right to, agree with the Constitution or not, it says in there that the government, if the people working for the government are obeying their oath, that we have a right to a fair and public trial. Why can't we bring cameras into the courtroom?
Yeah.
How is that public if only like a handful of people can go in there and actually witness what's going on?
You have to pay for the transcripts.
Right? It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And of course, the transcripts don't do you that much good these days anyway, because everyone on social media wants to see video. You show them video, and it'll go viral. You show them a transcript, and nobody will read it. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the millions of declassified documents, emails, all kinds of stuff out there that people could read. Even what you were talking about before, the tax codes with no actual law about income tax. And the majority of people don't care to read through this stuff. And
Right.
a lot of stuff is still considered conspiracy theory when it's out there and just no one wants to read it.
Oh yeah, MK Ultra. I mean, that's declassified. That was an actual program. The chemicals that they were spraying in the air over St. Louis, that's a fact. That's a factual military experiment. And what's really interesting is they have this rule where documents aren't declassified until 30 years later. So we see these things 30 years after they happen, and people it's like when they come out, everybody's just willing to accept, oh well, that was 30 years ago, so it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
No, that means the shit they're doing today is probably 20 times worse, and we're not going to find out about it for another 30 years.
Oh yeah, 30 years is plenty of time for them to put their spin on it, re-educate people to their way of thinking, to get rid of the outrage, and just make their own story out of it. It's nuts.
Yep.
They try to make sure, everybody's too busy to really pay attention to any of this stuff or delve into the information. That's what I hear so much is I just don't have time to look into this stuff. So.
Right. That's really what's irritated me about whenever I hear a politician get up there and say jobs, this concept of jobs is really only a few centuries old. I mean, if you think about it, when we were all, before we even started agriculture, really, we're just wandering around hunting and gathering, right? That whole concept is maybe a couple millennium old. And then then it became people started, settling and doing their own agriculture. Then it's they were providing for themselves, or they'd provide as a community, and there wasn't this massive oh, I got to get a job or I'm not going to be able to feed myself. That's really a relatively new concept.
Yeah.
And when you look at how you're working, and then the government comes and takes all of your money, so you've got nothing left, so you have to keep working, and you have to keep working harder, and you don't want to take a break from your job because God forbid someone else comes in and gets your job. It really puts a restriction on us to where we have to stay busy. And when I talk to volunteers for my campaign, everybody's well, I don't have time, I've got my job. It's really difficult. And you look at the big Democrat and Republican volunteers, and those guys are pulling in so much money from their donors that they're actually hiring their volunteers. They're not volunteers, they're employees. And of course, those guys are all pushing this big agenda of let's keep everybody in the hamster wheel doing this thing. And then at the same time, they're threatening us with, this guy that's pushing the UBI. Automation is going to come in and take all of our jobs, and nobody's going to have any money. That's great. That's wonderful. Imagine a world where all of your food, all of your shelter, all of your cars and transportation and everything are provided through automation. We're not going to need jobs. Things are going to work themselves out naturally the way they do, as long as we don't try to create some central control over how that's going to work. I mean, somebody's got to, if Amazon found out how to be 100% completely automated and they had 0 employees, guess what? That means we get stuff to our house cheaper. Like we get all this crap we buy on Amazon, all these little gadgets we have, our big screen TVs, all this other stuff. That just means we get it cheaper, which means, you know, whatever we end up using in the future as money for the economy. And, you know, it'll be a natural transition if we just allow it to happen. But if government comes in and says, this is the way it's going to be because I said so, then we're going to end up forcing ourselves into a system that doesn't work. And it's, you know, it's going to be one of those things where it's not going to be an easy transition. It's just going to collapse at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transition is what scares a lot of people because, you know, right now, like you said, everybody has to have jobs. So how do we get from having jobs to full automation or whatever you want to call it without, you know, mass starvation, poverty, and all that? And government might be the linchpin in that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, because whatever they do, they're going to create a dependency. You know, if they switch to this UBI, that means everyone's going to be dependent on a government check. Mm-hmm. And what happens when, you know, so the it's based on this philosophy that if a corporation is manufacturing all of this stuff for us and they have 0 employees, they're going to be making massive profits because they don't have any employees. They don't consider that if the cost of producing if Ford can produce 100 million cars in an hour, what are they going to do? Keep the factory running and just have like billions of cars sitting around with no one to buy them? Like it doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
They're gonna have to lower the price. The price is, and you know, the fact that everybody has a car at some point, you know, if we don't have jobs, what are we going to say? Yeah, we still need to buy a new car every year. No, people are going to say, well, I'm just going to stick with this one because it works, and yeah, we'll just keep going with this. And so there's going to be a fair balance between that, and cost is going to come down. But now if you get to this mentality of, well, we're just going to take all of this corporation's profits and we're going to use that to distribute it as a UBI, as a universal basic income, then you're making everybody dependent on that system, which is bad. But then that system itself is dependent on these corporations making profit, which does not take into account that once they reach full automation, their profits aren't going to be that high. Yeah. And that's where we get into the, like, you know, the same kind of system we hit in 2008 where everybody was panicking and everything was crashing.
Yeah,
right.
That's crazy. Quite a rabbit hole we could go down.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting stuff. Well, we got a lot of questions actually from a Facebook post announcing that we were going to be interviewing you. And then I know we have some of our own questions as well. You want to jump into some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome.
Start out with the hard ones.
Yeah, I think the first one's pretty good. It's one from Jason Booth, which I know we know Jason Booth. He's the Anarchy Among Friends Roundtable discussion podcast. He's one of the hosts there, and all around good dude. And Jason wanted to ask, do you actually expect to contend or /win, or are you just running a public stunt campaign designed to educate and inform?
So that's an interesting question. So here's the thing. It really depends on what you consider a win, right? Most people are going to look at that like a win is you get the most votes, you get the electoral votes, you get the office. In order for that to happen for a candidate like myself, we need to change the mindset of the entire country. And this is a really big ask. What I see is people are getting what they want, right? And everyone's pissed off and they say, I don't have what I want, but they're getting what they want. It's like that be careful what you wish for thing, right?
Sure.
We had Clinton, and then everyone was pissed off about what Clinton did. So they said, okay, we need to switch parties. So we're going to get a Republican in there, and we need to give them more power so that they can undo everything Clinton did. Now Bush is in there. Well, we don't like what he's doing. We're going to switch parties again, but we need to give the government more power to undo everything he did. There's this mentality that's continuing to go on. And the way, like, Trump's in there right now with more power supposedly undoing what Obama did. Because it never works out that way, right? They never actually undo
Right.
things. And the left is already saying, you know, whatever we do, we need to give more power to the government, but only after we get Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton in there. Then we need to give them more power. And they completely forget, well, as soon as he's out, there's going to be another Republican, and that cycle is going to continue. People keep asking for bigger government to solve all these problems. And what we really need to do is we need to get people's mind out of that state of desire. And when people actually say, look, government is actually what's screwing us all over, we need less government. We need to solve our own problems. We need solutions that don't involve sticking a gun in someone's face to take their money and force them to do things in order to make the system work. We need solutions that can be adopted completely voluntarily, that everyone can just say, if I don't agree with it, I don't participate in it, and it doesn't make it any less of a beneficial program for anybody else. And once we start thinking like that, then we're going to get someone like me elected. And it might not be me, but it will be someone with that type of forward-thinking mentality. So in order for this to happen, we really need to change the mindset of the entire country, and that is a huge ask. So, you know, back to the question asking, am I doing this as, you know, a thing of principle, or am I actually trying to win? Yes, I'm actually playing to win, but this is what's actually going to need to happen in order for that to happen. And that's where I'm concentrating the effort of the campaign. And because of that, it's going to look like a different campaign, right? Like, I'm not going to be, you know, going around asking like, hey, can I put up yard signs? And, you know, it's not going to look like the same type of campaign that a Democrat and a Republican could run. I'm not going to be going around to big corporations asking if they can give me $100 million to run ads. It's going to be, you know, like it's a completely different approach, but we need to change that mindset. And once we change the mindset, it doesn't matter who gets elected. The people are going to continue to get what they want, which means they're not going to get these shady politicians who are making these lies and selling them all kinds of fake goods. We're going to actually get people who are coming up with these solutions.
Oh, good answer. Good answer on that. And I
so
think
the
that answer just...
TLDR of that?
Sorry, what was that, David?
Sorry. I said, so the TLDR of that, what I'm getting is, yeah, it's for a win, because a win to you is getting a message out there and changing public opinion.
That's a good take.
Sweet. Shoot it over to David for the next question.
Well, I think I'll go off of one of mine. And since you are running for president, do you believe that the authority of the president is valid?
So, man, you guys got time for another long answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Always.
We got all the time.
All right. So, the authority that the president has now is definitely not legitimate. The authority that the president could have is legitimate. And the reason I say that is, and I get into this argument with anarchists all the time who simply say government should not exist. But picture this: you have an organization. To the majority of people, they call this organization government. This government raises all its funds through voluntary means, and it doesn't have a single program that violates anybody's rights. A lot of anarchists will say that's not government, because government is the use of force, government is the violation of rights. You can call it whatever you want. If that's what it is, and you have a leader of that organization, maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's a corporation, maybe, you know, whatever it is, maybe it's just a community, whatever you want to call it, if it's not violating, you know, the natural law, these basic principles, it's fine for it to exist. And anybody running that organization with the intent to keep it that way, their position is valid. Now, if you say you don't want to call that government, that's fine. But if other people want to call that government, let them. Who cares? What's the difference? And so in that way, yes, the office of the president is legitimate if they can play by those rules. And of course, the government is currently not playing by those rules. So what is the legitimacy of the president to go in and continue the status quo? Is that legitimate? No. But if the president is going to go in and say, hey, look, all of this stuff we're doing is immoral. Sorry, all of this stuff you guys are doing is immoral. We're going to stop it. Then, of course, that's legitimate.
All right. Something that I think gets skipped over a bit, but might have been included in your explanation there is that would people have the right to secede, to exit that system, community, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I think it depends on the perspective. So, for example, right now, I'm not going to name any particular one, but there's a few cell phone companies that cover the entire country. If you decided you didn't like your current cell phone provider and you switched to another one, would that be secession, or would that just be, I no longer have anything to do with you, I'm going to participate with other people in other forms of voluntary association? As far as, to get less abstract and say, does the state have the right to secede? Absolutely. Does a city have a right to secede from a state? Absolutely. Does an individual have a right? Absolutely. I think it's based on a flawed premise that, somehow government is more sovereign than we are. We are the government's master. We tell the government to exist. They don't tell us to exist. So, this whole idea, imagine if, you didn't like your cell phone provider, so you went into the office and said, yeah, I'm going to cancel, I'm going to switch to another company. And they put a gun to your face and said, if you try to leave, we're going to have a civil war. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And so if there's a gun, if the only reason you're staying associated with somebody is because of the threat of force, because of the threat of a civil war, then that's not a voluntary agreement that you've got there.
Makes the whole institution illegitimate at that point. So yeah, definitely a good answer on that, because even using that word, just government, to describe that is what sets a lot of people off, whereas it could be, I don't know, accounts and records keeping, anything like that, just administration for different communities, I guess. Awesome. So let's move to
what's
go ahead.
Interesting is, like, I was going to say, like, if you look at some of the government offices, like the first time I tried to start a business, I had to go to the county clerk and register a DBA. If you look at that, like, that's really just a really, really old school way of registering information on the blockchain. I mean, if you think about it, property ownership, like, we can all do this with technology that doesn't require government, but before, that used to be what those offices were for. And they didn't really necessarily, like, now it's like when you register your business, you also have to pay fees and all this other crap. But, like, at the core of it, it was really just, hey, I'm going to give you a few bucks. You list my name on this paper saying that I'm going to go around town saying I'm operating as this business. So if anybody wants to find, if somebody sees my business name somewhere and they want to find out who it is, they can just come to the records and see, who it is. Which is, not really a violation of rights. It's kind of like a voluntary, like, yeah, let's just all be public about who we are and who we're saying we are. And okay, it's fine. Now we can do it on blockchain. So
Yeah.
what do we need the government for?
Definitely a good point. Moving on to another question from that thread. You got a friend of the show, Gabriel Edgar, asks, what are the three main issues that we face as a country that you're campaigning for or against, and how will those items being reconciled help facilitate a more voluntary society?
Sure. So let's see. If I had to break it down to three, obviously taxation is theft. A lot of people, I mean, I know we kind of all joke about that as like, yeah, we should all be paying less taxes. If you look at people who are really struggling financially in the US, a lot of it, and they don't even know this, a lot of it is taxes. And it's not just the tax that comes out of their paycheck. Maybe they're working under the table because they found a way to, increase their income by not paying income tax. If they have a roof over their head, they're paying property tax. And that's, everyone complains about the rent is too high. That's property tax that's raising your rent.
Mm-hmm.
What about food? They say, okay, well, there's no tax on food. Well, if it's prepared food, there's usually tax on that. So if you want to go to McDonald's, that's taxed. If you want to go to the grocery store and just buy fruits and veggies, yeah, maybe that's not taxed, but how are you going to eat those, right? I mean, some of them you can eat raw, but are you going to cook them? Because if you do, that's going to use electricity or gas, and that's all taxed. You drive your car to work, that's all taxed. Like, we don't realize it. We think that most of our taxes come out of our paycheck, but everything that we do is taxed, and we don't pay for it directly, and we don't always see the itemized receipt. So it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it's there, and it makes it really difficult, especially for those who are struggling to get by. So that's one. The next one is healthcare, and for that one, specifically, I would deregulate the FDA and a lot of the medical regulations that make it difficult for doctors to operate. They make it more expensive. They eliminate the competition that's within the entire medical field, and they help prop up these big pharma profits. If you get rid of that, we're going to see more innovation, which means newer cures for diseases that there have been no cures for. We're going to see new treatments for diseases to, if we can't cure them, at least things are going to be more comfortable, and they're going to be a lot more affordable. So this whole question of health insurance and, socialized medicine, the reality is all that's doing is that's sharing the cost in helping big pharma get rich off of their government protected monopoly. We have to get rid of that. And the third one I would say is, that's going to be a toss-up between the national debt and the war on drugs. You mind if I give 4?
Yeah, go for it.
So the war on drugs, we just need to end that. It's completely immoral to tell people what they can or cannot put in their bodies, and that's why I have the campaign platform of legalized pineapple pizza. Nobody should be able to tell you what to put in your body. And the national debt, most of this money is a fabrication. This debt is not really real, especially when you consider a large portion of it goes to the Federal Reserve, who never lent anything to the government in the first place. Supposedly they lent us all this money, but their name is on the money that they lent us. The United States government owns the printing presses, they own the ink, they own the paper, they pay for the labor, they pay for the electricity, they own the property where it's produced. That's the government, and somehow that's called lending. That doesn't make any sense. And there's a whole game of 3-card Monte where, like, we print some treasury notes and we give that to the Fed, and then the Fed gives us the permission to print money with their name on it. It's just a big shenanigan, and we need to just discharge that debt and say, hey, this is imaginary. There is no money. If you took all the printed U.S. dollars and all of the gold in the world, you could not pay off the $22 trillion debt. Forget about the other $60 trillion in unfunded obligations. So that's what we have to do with it. And I know a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, it's going to destroy the economy, and it's not. And the reality is, it's going to happen sooner or later. That is a decaying tooth that needs to be pulled, and you can put spackle all over it all you want. That tooth is coming out eventually.
Nice. What you got, David?
Well, I was wondering if I don't know what your personal philosophies are pertaining to nonviolence or anything like that, but I know a lot of listeners and other people believe in, the NAP, the non-aggression principle, or whatever individual non-aggression ideals they have. Do you believe holding office and receiving payment that comes through taxation, does that violate the NAP or some form of non-aggression, non-coercion?
So that's an interesting question. And the way I've looked at that is, obviously if taxation is theft and I'm going to get elected and then I'm going to start receiving a paycheck that's funded by theft, then, absolutely that's a violation of the NAP. But at the same time, we talked earlier about the tax honesty movement, and nobody has to pay taxes. If we actually started legally enforcing the income tax to where people who are paying taxes now would mostly not be paying tax, but if they wanted to, they could voluntarily contribute to a campaign, then that's a great way to fund it. And what's really interesting about that is, if the IRS just actually starts acting within accordance of the law, people will stop paying the tax, and there's not going to be a whole lot of money for the government to operate. So that's going to happen. But what's even more interesting is if you look back historically at the history of the United States, in the first years, Congress and the president and everything else, these were really part-time volunteer positions, and we need to get back to that. Like, these weren't meant to be high salary jobs, and they weren't for a very long time. People they'd be lawyers and doctors, and they'd go do their own things, and a couple times a year they'd head over to DC and they'd meet and do what they do. It wasn't a full-time thing, and it never really was intended to. And when it becomes that, of course, they sit around all day coming up with laws that they really shouldn't be coming up with. So I think there is a voluntary way to make that happen, and I'm happy to not accept any money that was raised by involuntary means.
Awesome.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, that was another friend of the show and host of Voluntary Japan, Graham Smith, asked, how's your salary going to be paid? And so I think you nailed it there. Shout out to Graham. He also asked, though, you're running as a joke, right? And I think we covered that as well. I think it's more information, getting information out there than a joke. So another question from, let's go with Jim Gravis. Jim actually posted a meme that stated, democracy is the illusion that we can repair a car by changing the driver. So in question form, I would guess, do you find that to be true, that democracy is the illusion that we can repair a car by changing the driver?
I would say people give too much credit to democracy. Democracy is just a process. I mean, like, if you think about it, if the three of us were sitting in a car and said, hey, we're going to take a road trip, let's vote on who's going to drive, there's no violation of rights there, right? We're just picking. So democracy itself is really just a process. Now, if the three of us say, let's say two of us vote on whether or not we should kill the third person, and of course, the two of us vote yes and the one person votes no, well, it's still democracy, but of course it's an immoral use of, I wouldn't even say I don't know, you could say it's an immoral use of democracy, but it's an immoral outcome, whatever it is. It's an immoral question that was asked in the first place. The reality is when you talk about, changing the driver, I mean, let's say the three of us are in the car and David's just drunk off his ass and he's driving and we say, hey man, you want to pull over? I'll take over from here. You actually are kind of solving the problem, right? So I think there is some validity to changing the driver when that applies, but at the same time, what's the car made out of? And, is the car packed with explosives, and should the car ever have been packed with explosives in the first place? Maybe not. So that's, I think that question's a little bit deeper than just a black and white yes or no.
I agree. Absolutely. Definitely a good answer. Back to David.
A lot of my own questions, he's already answered, but I think this one is a commenter question, and it was one of mine that I had on my list.
Okay.
So, if you are elected, would you dismantle the government? Where would you start? What programs and agencies would go first? And I believe Mason asked that. Mason Taylor also asked that.
Yes.
Sure. So dismantle is a harsh word. And this is kind of where we have to walk a tight line, because we are trying to convince the country that they don't need government, or that at least they don't need a government that exists on coercion. And they hear that and they kind of freak out. So what I would say is, first of all, absolutely, when it comes to, day one, what are the first things we're going to do? We're going to look at like the completely useless systems like the Federal Department of Education. Let the states do their own thing. If you got rid of it today, they'd still be functioning. The FBI, a lot of the programs that they're running don't need to exist. There are so many programs that we could just say, hey, we're going to cut these. All of the drug war related, the DEA can go. The ATF, they're fired. you know, a lot of this can go on day one and no one's even going to notice a difference, right? When's the last time you went out to go see a movie and like ATF was there on the way just to keep everything safe? That's, you know, that's what they do is a little bit more sinister when it comes to our rights and freedoms. So those can just flat out go. When it comes to things like FDA, you know, this is one of those things where what I'd like to do is make it less mandatory, and that's part of the deregulation. So if a company comes up, like let's say a company has this new miracle drug, right? And it could potentially save lives, and especially of people with terminal conditions. And, you know, we've heard all about like right to try laws and all this other stuff. If a company has a new medication and you're going to die and you want to try it, you should be able to try it. All you got to do is say, hey, we're going to sell you this drug. We're just going to say it's not FDA approved. Why not do that with other things? Why not allow other private companies to come in and say, hey, your drug is not FDA approved. We understand the FDA process is ridiculous. Bring it to us. We'll examine it and we'll put our name on it instead. And now when you go to the drugstore, you know, or the doctor goes to prescribe you something, they can say, well, do you want the FDA approved one or do you want the one that's been approved by this private agency? Then the FDA kind of becomes useless, and it'll take some time for a company like this to be created and exist. And that's kind of like one of those areas where I would say, look, if we just got rid of the FDA today and everyone started selling, you know, whatever concoctions they came up with without allowing, you know, some sort of third-party independent approval company to be formed and exist, then yeah, we're going to be there's probably going to be some crap on the market. But if we kind of create a transition for that to happen, and I know a lot of the anarchists are like cringing, like he's going to let them stick around. You know, if we create an environment like that, then all of the people who are happy with the FDA and they're happy with the state of medicine, or at least with the quality of medicine, you know, they're happy enough to let things go, and at least a really good replacement is coming in, and maybe we can sell the FDA off as its own private company that has to compete legitimately with the others, you know, things like that. So that would be kind of the next phase.
All right. Well, as a kind of follow-up question, I guess, to that, what's to stop the next car driver, you know, to undo all of that? Oh
man. Well, I mean, if these programs are, if we disassemble the car, he's going to have to rebuild a whole new one. And not only that, he's going to have to convince everybody to get back into that car. And the reality is, you know, if I take us to the freedom that we had 100 years ago, and I get rid of all these systems that have been built up over time, and you know, and I know people are freaking out at that thought, but you know, in a way where people are actually happy and satisfied with not having those systems around, then what's going to happen is the next idiot who comes in and says, hey, we're going to bring all these systems back, everyone's going to say, wait a minute, my paycheck is twice as big because you're not stealing all these taxes out of it. My life, the quality of my life is even better because I have more freedom, and it's better even though all of these programs and agencies don't exist. And now you're going to come over here and tell me that we have to put these agencies back so you can start cutting my paycheck in half again? People aren't going to accept that. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult.
Hell yeah. As what is his name, Randy Jackson would say, or whatever the hell his name is from American Idol, that's going to be a no from me, dog. That's what people would say.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you're covering most of these questions, but there's a little more pointed one from Erica Payne here that we may have covered a bit, but maybe we can get more specific. How is running for president not an application to be everyone's master?
Sure. That's really a matter of the perception of the role of government. I mean, if you look at what government is, and I had a hard time kind of adopting this belief myself. You know, I used to think, okay, the city government is my master, the state is a higher master, and the federal government is a higher master. And at some point, the UN is going to be a higher master to that. that's kind of like the mentality that I grew up in, because I was always told the government makes the rules and you have to follow those rules. And when the police stop you, it's always, you watch TV shows and the police are investigating a crime and then the FBI comes in and says, oh, we're going to take it over. That's kind of like the hierarchy that we have in our minds. But when, like, this prison exists in our own minds, and when you realize that this prison doesn't need to exist, that you can get out of that prison in your own mind, then there is no master. I don't want to be master over anybody, and I don't want anybody to think that I am master over them. And if we believe, I mean, look, you can believe that someone else is your master and they can have absolutely no intent to rule over you. But if you believe they're your master, then that's just the way you're going to act and respond to them. Now, I will say this, like, it feels like they're our master when we have all these laws. And if you get caught, oh my God, he's got cannabis on him, let's throw him in a prison and all this other, then yeah, it feels like there was some master. But the reality is you had the freedom to have that cannabis and to use it however you chose. And some criminal came along and said, hey, we're going to stick you in a prison. And so if I participate in that, then I'm a criminal too. But if I choose not to participate in that, then not only am I not a criminal, I'm not your master. And if we can get more people to realize that government is not our master, then I think we're going to be in a much better place. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, very well said. You got any more, David?
I think all of my questions are answered now. So let's just keep going with the comments. Are there more?
Sure. There's one more that, well, there's a couple more. I think from Brett Adkins here. It's a little bit of an inflammatory question, but I'd like to see how you answer it. Brett asks, how is defeating statism with statism working out for you?
Right. It sounds like the question, or it sounds like the statement that you can't fix it from the inside. I think that statement is false, that you can't fix things from the outside. And that's not to say that it's the only way to fix things. Government has become this big, ugly beast, and, you can infect it from, if you want to take it down, you got to take it down from a million different directions. But to say you can't fix it from the inside is to say termites can't take down a house from the inside. But we've seen that. A lot of anarchists claim that 9/11 was an inside job. But wait, I thought you said you can't take things down from the inside. The Death Star, that was an inside job. So it's, yes, if I become part of the problem, absolutely, I'm not going to fix it. But the office itself is not the problem. It's it's like the car is not the problem. The gun is not the problem. Guns don't kill people. Bad people with guns kill people. So to put the gun in an honest person's hand and say, okay, disassemble the gun or put it away, put the safety on, take off the big scary assault weapon like attachments, whatever analogy you want to use for government. I think that's it, and that's actually really, that's really another interesting point. We talk about, if we get into the gun ban discussion, a gun ban doesn't work. Everyone's, if you ban guns, people are just going to manufacture their own guns. Okay, well, if you ban government, wouldn't people manufacture their own governments if that's what they wanted? It's really kind of interesting, because government is just an idea, right? So it may never go away. But if we can at least get it to the point where we know, we get people to think how to use it responsibly, and that means don't violate people's rights, don't steal, don't hurt people, don't imprison them because they do some behavior that you don't like, then I think we can live with that. Hey, I never would have been down this path, and I never would have cared if government existed or not if I never had a single encounter with them and I didn't even know they existed, and I was free to do and live my life however I wanted. But of course, as I grew up and tried to do more things and start a business and travel and all these other things, and I saw the presence of government, that's when I said, this is wrong and we need to fix this. So if they're hiding in the bushes and they're there and I don't see them, that's fine with me.
I think a lot of the aversion from fighting it from the inside that people have is the fear that the people fighting it from the inside will become that thing that they're fighting. And I think you mentioned that. And there's just also the fact that it's a big club and they don't want to give up control of that club either. So there's a lot of doubt as to how much progress you'll make.
Right. And that kind of goes back to my point in one of the earlier questions that, it is a big club and they don't want me in it. But if we can shape the minds of the people to demand more freedom and less government, then that whole club is going to change. If people are demanding, any kind of candidate who have a message like mine that says government is not your master, we are not government property, and we don't belong to government, we shouldn't be forced to pay taxes for programs we don't want. When they start hearing, more people like that, and it'll happen at every level that they don't control every single city council. Some city councils are relatively legitimate. Some state seats are easier to get into. And when we start seeing people get into all those positions, then we're absolutely going to see that. And the reality is, let's say if I can become president and I can be completely 100% uncorruptible, how much am I really going to get done when I've got Congress there who is all saying, oh, this guy's crazy, we need big government, we need big government, and all of their constituents are supporting them and saying, this president is terrible, he just wants to get rid of everything. I'm not going to get very far. I might be impeached in the first week. But if people accept, this idea that less government is better, and like I said, this is the win. The win is not getting into the office. The win is changing the minds of the people so that I can get into office. If those minds are changed in that way, then all the congressmen, all the senators, everything from the dog catcher to the judges to, every elected position of government is going to have people who are thinking like this in those positions. And that's when we're going to see real change.
I think it's a question of different targets then, because my target would be changing the culture, changing the way humans interact with each other to the point where government is not necessary at all versus, less government or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. But it's like a heroin addict. You don't just cut them off cold turkey. You got to wean them off of it. And to a lot of people who are dependent on government services, maybe that's not just, because they're on welfare, but because they're, whatever government service they love, you've got to wean them off of it. And it's, FDA is a really good example. People are going to be paranoid about buying any drug for, any kind of medication if the FDA were just went away overnight. But if you create that transition, then the people who are dependent on that form of government, they'll be weaned off of it and they'll be more accepting of those alternatives. But you're absolutely right. It is a change of the mentality of the people, and that's step one. And step two is getting those people to then vote for demand the change. And like I said, whether it's myself or somebody else, if those people are demanding less government or completely voluntary government, that's when we're going to start to see it. Not see it.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the answer. I agree on step one. I can't agree on step two. But, it is what it is. Agree to disagree. That's something I've thought about quite a bit since starting this show and whatnot, is that step two. And I prefer the agorist route. But I do appreciate
absolutely
that good answer.
For anyone going the agorist route and being charged by government for collecting rainwater or whatever it is, you'll get a full pardon from me. So let's attack it from both sides.
Campaign promises. Look out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, and if I don't do it on day one, impeach me.
Yeah. Let's see. A couple little more specific questions. Yeah. From Mason Taylor. Who will be in the cabinet, if you've thought of it about it to that point, and do you have a 2-year plan? And he asks, how much will public opinion influence the policies? And I think you've answered that.
Yeah, so I think as far as the cabinet, I actually have some really interesting people that I'd like on there, but I don't want to say any names yet because some of them I haven't talked to yet, and some of them are just kind of thinking about it, or I'm not entirely sure. I guess I'm thinking about it as far as they go.
Sure.
So, but they're like, what I'd really like to see in my cabinet is people who are very thoughtful about solutions to some of these problems that society faces. And the reason for that is, if government has any function at all, this goes back to witch doctors and the guy who talks to the rain gods and everything else. People have problems and they want solutions and they don't know how to solve them. So they look to other people, like, who can solve this problem? And if we can have people who are trying to figure out these solutions, and they might be anarchists who say, well, how do we create this problem? How do we have money without government? Oh, well, Bitcoin. And how, so if we get those types of thinkers on the cabinet, then we can say, look, here are some ideas. We will actively support you. We will make sure government is clear out of your way if you want to come along and start this business or start this idea and provide this service to the community. And maybe they're coming up with the ideas. Maybe they're helping to clear the path and reaching out to the owners of these businesses who want to create these solutions, to say, hey, what are your challenges? Is government in your way? Is there anything we can do to get it out of the way? I think those are the types of people that I'd want on the cabinet.
Awesome. Well, I think we're pretty much coming up to time here. Do you have any closing thoughts, David?
I suppose my closing thoughts would be, I'm glad that it's more about a message for you and informing people and changing mindsets than it really is for becoming the president and wielding state power to end the state. That makes it a little bit easier for me to, not have spent this entire podcast just straight up arguing with you. So that's all I got.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely like that. I don't know. I disagree with the whole idea that people need someone in that position no matter what. As I said, the agorist route is the route for me. I believe it's the best route, but I definitely appreciate your very excellent answers to these questions and just, nice demeanor overall. Yeah, it was really a pleasure to talk to you. Anything you'd like to say? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I had something a second ago. It was in response to what David said, and I totally lost it. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is the message: we are not government property. Taxation is theft. Let's starve the beast, and let's force them into being a voluntary system. And yeah, we absolutely need to wake people up to that. Like I said, the prison is in the mind, and if we are not free in our minds, then there's no hope. That's kind of the first step. We have to believe that we are free. We have to. I mean, I'll give anyone a challenge listening to this. Find the first mirror you can find. Look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself, I am free, and see how good that feels. That is the biggest thing you can possibly have, because the next time you get stopped by the police or any government agent is in your face, or you get a letter from them saying, you've got to do something, when you look at that with the mentality that you are free, your response is going to be completely different. So that's really, really important.
That's awesome. I agree wholeheartedly. So where can people find you on social media, websites, anything you want to plug right now?
So Behrman2020.com, that's BEHRMAN 2020.com, legalizepineapplepizza.org. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I have various different names on those. But if you look for Dan Behrman, you'll see me. I'm the crazy guy with the big yellow hat that says Taxation is Theft on it. You can't miss me. And then I have a YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/taxationistheft, and that's where I put a lot of my show content, which is interviews and everything else, which is pretty awesome stuff.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to have Dan send me all those links, and I will include them in the notes for this show. That was a great talk, guys. Great interview, great discussion. I really enjoyed it. We'll see everybody next time. Say bye, guys.
See you later. Thanks for having me on. This was awesome.
Bye, everybody.